just made the green cover with Women and Children First written on the front.
Interesting. What's also interesting is, believe it or not, Dave, miracle of miracles, Alex Van Halen has spoken to the press. Can you believe this? Unbelievable. So Modern Drummer put out a special Alex Van Halen edition of their magazine, and it's all Alex, the whole thing, but in it is a brand new interview. And this is very exciting because he talks about different things here. And Alex was no holds barred here. He was very frank and upfront in talking about various sections. So I broke down some of the things to talk about. He talks about how the band works. I'm assuming this interview definitely took place before Eddie's passing because it had to in terms of the amount of timing. But it's all relevant, though, because he talks about kind of the inner workings of Van Halen. So he says, all the people who think they know how the band operates, maybe even including Dave, weren't 100% there all the time. Ed and I are the only ones there day and night. When they leave, Ed and I go back in and work on shit. Or Ed, Wolf, and I go back in and work on it. He was very frank about that. Like, he's very kind of possessive about this is our band and we steer the ship. When he talks about friction in the band, he says, we get into the studio to actually record it and then there's some friction. It's easy to say the brothers are fighting again. And he laughed and he says, being in a band is no different from any other territorial dispute. Everybody is trying to claim a certain piece of territory. The real solution is to play together, to play as a unit. You're much stronger that way. Conflict is good, but once it gets to a certain point, that's not good. So obviously he's not a big fan of the friction. And one thing he also wanted to note, and he really came out swinging on this one. He's talking about no one really knows what goes on. So he says, all these people are writing books about the band, and they know nothing about the inner workings of this band. And Ed and I don't say anything because we're not in the business of bullshitting on the internet and books and all kinds of crap. We just want to play. It's that simple. Obviously, there's been a lot of books, the Ted Templeman book, obviously the Noel Monk book, all the different books that have come out, and he's saying you guys don't know shit. So interesting. What do you make of that, Dave?
Well, no one really knows what's going on in his and Ed's head except for him, right? But I wouldn't discount anybody else who wrote a book who was so involved with the band.
That's true.
Right?
Yeah.
Like Ted Templeman. I mean, come on. Right?
Exactly.
Or even Noel Monk. I mean,
I know.
Come on.
Right.
I mean, you can't just discount their knowledge of what was going on in the band at the time. I thought it was an interesting article. I was afraid there was going to be a lot about drumming, but there was some, but it wasn't drum tech heavy, surprisingly.
Right. Yeah. Interesting. So he gets into some other stuff here, like the contributions into the band. He says Ed would come in with the licks, and the band would put the music together, and we would make songs out of it. It was a very communal process. If you had a thought or an idea, you just throw it in, and the loudest voice wins. So that's he's talking about the mix there, and he's talking about also leaving some room for improvisation. He said we would rehearse, and if we had it about 80% right, that was the prime time to go into the studio. Leave enough room for error. Leave enough room for spontaneity. He says, because in those moments, the magic happens. There should be a percentage left undone. So there's a little bit of the Van Halen formula he's giving you there, that not everything is so pat, that they have an idea what they want. But then he talks about working with a producer. He says part of it was the conflict between the band and Dave. He's talking about how important was it to have a producer in the Van Halen world. He says, part of it was the conflict between the band and Dave. One of the things that made everything work was that we came from opposite ends of the spectrum. Dave was vaudeville, and he claimed to be James Brown. Ed and I were coming from Cream, Led Zeppelin, Black Sabbath. So having that strange chemistry is what made it work, oddly enough. But you do need a mediator. Otherwise, we would have never gotten anything done. So he's pretty obviously frank about that. Ted was the hammer. You know, I really think that was a really big difference there, Dave. In a lot of different albums, Ted was the hammer. So the only firm producer they had other than Ted was Bruce Fairbairn, which was the last album, Balance. But that kind of came too little too late. But that, you know, that album sounded good. What do you make of those comments?
They definitely needed somebody to kick them in the butt.
Yeah.
Right? I mean, they definitely needed a producer. So,
yeah.
I mean, otherwise it was like, I mean, I wasn't there, but my sense was kind of like herding cats.
Yeah.
So I agree with you. They needed, you know, a strong producer like Ted Templeman in there.
Exactly.
So, otherwise, yeah.
Now, one thing he did address that we've always talked about, Dave, is, and you've made a big point about it, Alex has never played with anyone else. It's really incredible. And they brought that to him and says, amazingly, you've never really played outside of Van Halen. This is what Alex says. This is my band. I don't need to go elsewhere. Creatively, this is the place where it happens. This is the band that Ed and I started. Just like my loyalty to Ludwig, I will never change. My loyalty is to this band. So he's really firm there. And he wasn't joking around about that. And speaking of his loyalty to Ludwig, he talks about how he was offered money from Tama, but he walked away. He said, in 1979, Tama wanted me to become an endorser. They wanted to give me a lot of money. And I said, nope, I played Ludwig. Thank you. Goodbye. So Al is no bullshit, this guy. He really is straightforward, you know? There's no mincing words with Al.
Very dedicated and very loyal.
Yeah, and also very straightforward. He talks about the music business, and they asked him, is it strange for you to see the different consumption of the way music is recorded and listened to today? And he said, modern technology sucks. There's nothing left in the music business. It's a bunch of ones and zeros. In the old days, you get $1 a record, and now you get 50 cents for 275,000 streams. It's insane. It's wrong. Now, the only thing you have left is playing live, which is ironic because that's how it all started. That's quite a statement. Quite a statement, I tell you that much.
Well, I'm sure he's not the only one that feels that way.
Oh, I know.
Either,
oh,
right?
I know. I tell you, the more I think about it and the more I see what goes on, it's amazing the state that the music business has been in. They've really been floundering and floating around for a really long time now. It's incredible. They just don't know what to do. When he talked about Sam and Dave, he says here, Sammy has a great rhythmic sense, and of course that voice. Dave was much more of a poet. Dave is creative. 90% of it is garbage, but that 10% is fucking worth it, man. What planet did you come from? And we grew up together. So it was interesting that he, made that comparison between the two. And he's talking about how they would come in with a song. He says, if Dave came in with a song, I would respect how they heard it. Then it's the old trick. Keep your friends close and your enemies closer. And that means, okay, I'll listen to you, but then I'm going to make it mine. And by the end of the process, it will sound nothing like what you hummed to me. So it sounded like it was a free-for-all over there in that 5150 studio, if you can believe that.
Well, there were lots of strong personalities, right? I mean,
God.
So, someone will tell Al, hey, Al, I need the jungle drums.
Yeah, I know.
I'll be like, yeah, okay, no problem. Then Al would do whatever the heck he wanted anyway, right?
Exactly. He does what he wants. And then he was talking about Wolf, right? And he said, we all thought it was a big risk to take, putting Wolf in the band. But Wolf stepped up to the plate by being respectful of the parts that Mikey played. He didn't trash them. It was very mature choice for him to play the parts as they were on the record, but with a little bit of movement. But the second thing I told him after great job was stay the fuck off my drums. I guess
that was great.
He didn't want to be replaced by Wolf because Wolf, obviously, as he said earlier, his favorite instrument is the drums. And the last thing that I wanted to note, he talked a little bit about a different kind of truth. And he kind of really puts through some water on some of the critics here. He says, when they talk about how the songs were made up, and he says, we didn't use entire older songs, but the DNA of what we felt propels the band. Van Halen is not just a one-dimensional band. It was very insightful of Dave to make a socio-political comment on a song like Chinatown, that everything is made from China now. They love that song, Chinatown. That's one of their all-time favorites on that album. They're very happy with it. So, I think they were sick and tired of getting... I mean, it's incredible how many people write that album off like, it's just a bunch of old demos rebaked over. I swear to God, it aggravates me every time.
I can tell.
Yeah.
But, you and I like that album a lot. I think in some ways it's so hard. I don't know if raw is the right word, but, it's just so rockin'. It's got like that Fair Warning vibe in places. And I think that's almost like a little too much for people. So,
yeah.
Like Fair Warning, like diehard fans love Fair Warning, but I think it's like their worst selling album out of the original Dave one. I think that might be the trouble with A Different Kind of Truth.
Right, absolutely. So now, Wolf got a little ticked off by this TMZ article that came out. And I'm not going to get into specifics because he wasn't happy with releasing all this. But I just want to let everybody know, if you haven't heard it, that all these details about Eddie's death, his death certificate, what happened, how he died, when he died, where he died, all this all that real sort of hardcore stuff got exposed by TMZ, and Wolf was not pleased. He was very upset about it. So I'm not going to report about it because I don't want to spread that, because that's personal, it's family information, but it's to note that even someone like Eddie, who's a private guy, it's amazing how they could just get that. I mean, they actually had the physical report, and the only thing they did was wipe out people's addresses, so their addresses were not, put forth in the press. But I tell you, it's kind of scary, Dave, like how everybody can just get any piece of information they want.
I know, it is scary.
Yeah.
I admit that TMZ, they have some staff. They've got some sources. I applaud how they get this stuff out there, but I don't applaud that they decide it should be out there.
Yeah, it's dirty.
Because death certificates were meant to be public. Public, and they're not. So I know. I know why they do it, but man, come on.
The thing that's also sad is the family's already going through a lot. You know what I mean? Like, they already lost a guy at a young age, tragically. So while they're going through that process, let's just piss all over them. I mean,
I know. While they continue to grieve, let's put out, the details.
Just the worst. So, really, at some point you got to sort of stop and maybe say, maybe we shouldn't do that. You know what I mean? It's and
many websites and publications don't.
They don't. I know.
That doesn't. That's not TMZ's business.
No, they're balls to the wall. Interesting enough. So speaking about Eddie, one thing that came out which was actually nice about Eddie after his passing was Jason Becker, who is David Lee Roth's former guitarist for A Little Ain't Enough. Okay, in the 1991 solo album by Dave, Jason Becker is the guy who replaced Steve Vai. He is an unbelievable guitarist. He no longer can play because of his ALS disease. However, Jason is still writing music, and he's still composing. And one thing Jason did do is, in the wake of Eddie's passing, is he released this incredible video of Eddie coming to visit him in his home. Now, what's really interesting about this is the timing. So this visit to his home was on August 31st, 1996. Dave, this was a few mere days before the whole MTV disaster. And when Eddie was working with Roth. So they were working on the Best Of album at that time. So it's interesting that it was Eddie who was going to visit Jason, not Roth, who worked with Jason. It's all very strange, right? So he said here in a video, now Jason, although he can't speak and he can't play, he can communicate. And he works with his family and he communicates. These are his words. And it says, "It's really hard to watch myself struggling here. This was right before getting my trach and stomach tube, and I couldn't breathe talk, or eat. I was very weak. Today, I'm much better, and I wanted to show the incredible love I received from Eddie Van Halen. Not only was he a master of the guitar, his heart and soul are here for all to see. And what he does